When used in general language, the terms pedagogy and space tend to take on taken for granted meanings. Whilst there might be debate around the margins, pedagogy is seen as relating to the activities of teaching and learning. Space is seen as related to the site, physical or virtual, in which one finds oneself. When the two terms are combined as pedagogic space, everyday meaning is likely to be interpreted as the site in which teaching and learning occurs. In a broad sense, this is the way that the term pedagogic space is used in the current paper. As will be demonstrated, we need to be cognizant that the language of pedagogic space is not neutral. A survey of the literature on pedagogic space reveals the two broad approaches to a consideration of pedagogic space. Firstly, a functionalist approach, and secondly, a symbolic approach. The functional approach to pedagogic space is concerned with matters of physical, technological, operational and instructional design. Consistent with the technical scientific perspective, the functional perspective draws its assumptions from the natural sciences. It values objectivity, measurement and the assumption of cause and effect, and rational logical behaviour is embraced. Therefore, design principles can be used to promote particular outcomes. It's assumed that if learners are exposed to the particular stimuli, for example, physical design and processes, that they will respond predictably in a generalisable manner. The strength of the functional perspective is that it moves debates about pedagogic space beyond the anecdotal towards responses that are objective and measurable. However, a major limitation of this functional perspective is that it fails to acknowledge the influences of the broader socio-cultural environment in which the pedagogic space is embedded, and fails to recognise the agency of people within the space and renders assumptions about the purposes of that space as normative. The second major approach to consideration of pedagogic space is concerned with symbolic issues. The symbolic approach renounces the assumptions of objectivity, measurability, generalisability, rationality and predictability that are consistent with the functional perspective. The assumptions that underpin the symbolic approach embrace the influence of social, cultural and political influences that are historically informed, in shaping the ways that people within pedagogic spaces understand and render meaning to those spaces. It is the meanings that the actors attribute to the physical, virtual, human and technological aspects of the pedagogic space that are of primary concern. The symbolic approach values subjectivity and embraces the importance of the context within which the pedagogic space is embedded. Rather than perceiving human behaviour as entirely logical, rational and self-interested, responses to changing conditions are viewed as uncertain. DeLeo and Jacobs 2004 state that, at its most fundamental level, classroom is simply a place or space. Consideration of classrooms on this level must refrain from descriptions of value and regard each and every teaching space as a site of pure political and pedagogic possibilities. Actualisation of a classroom's potential is only realisable on the interaction of the classroom space with a set of human participants. This citation is consistent with the notion of a symbolic approach. Here, the physical design, technological design, operational protocols, design of instructional resources, etc., embed assumptions about the purposes of education and the roles of teachers and students within the pedagogic space. The primary concern is to make these assumptions explicit. As Costagritz and Peeler 2004 observed, in recent years the notion of pedagogic space has emerged as a means to rethink the way that we conceive of the situated nature of pedagogic practice. The benefit of the functional approach to pedagogic space is that it brings a sense of objectivity to the design of such spaces. However, as Watkins 2007 asserts, space from a pedagogic perspective needs to be understood in more than simply a phenomenological sense. Although important, such an approach lacks the necessary social dimensions. What the symbolic approach brings to a discussion on pedagogic space is an acknowledgement of the importance of social, cultural and political influences on the way in which spaces are interpreted and meaning is rendered. Through a symbolic analysis, it is possible to render the assumptions that underpin the design of a pedagogic space more explicit, and then renders these challengeable. As Apple 1996 asserts, education is not a neutral activity, but one that is produced out of the cultural, political and economic conflicts, tensions and compromises that organise and disorganise people. Consistent with Bernstein, 1999, pedagogic spaces are representative of the institution of education that supports a particular moral disposition, motivation and aspiration, embedded in particular performances and practices, where curriculum reform emerges out of a struggle between groups that make their biases and focus state policy and practice. The use of the language of pedagogic space provides an opportunity for power brokers to render the assumptions that underpin their positions and the power relations that underpin those assumptions implicit, thus rendering the practices that they portray as normative and less subject to challenge. If as educators we are committed to the development of individuals as full participants in society and not simply in the preparation for work, then it is critical that we actively engage in discussions about pedagogic space from not only a function but also a symbolic perspective.